we've got a very exciting panel coming up. How many of, show of hands in the room, I can almost see you. Show of hands, how many of you have broadband access to the internet now? Raise your hand. Okay, let me ask you a different question. Who doesn't? Raise your hand. The schools, right? This is a challenge because is there anybody in the room that doesn't access the internet at some point in time every day of your life? Anybody? Well, I would assert there are millions of people in California that don't have that ability. So we have an outstanding group of people that are working to solve that problem, and they're going to come up on stage in just a second and give you kind of a state of the state of what's going on, some of the activities that are taking place to try and improve that state of affairs, and how you as public service individuals, especially either individually or within your organizations, can help to accomplish that. Right. Here for your Master of Ceremonies and your moderator, I'd like to bring up Robert Osborn. He's a senior analyst for the California Public Utilities Commission, and he's going to be moderating this discussion. He's going to bring up the rest of the panelists and introduce them. So without any further ado, please welcome Robert Osborn. Thank you.
Thank you. I wanted to see, just to add on to the poll that happened a couple minutes ago, how many of you are familiar or know your broadband speed at home? Can I see a show of hands? Okay, maybe about half. Secondly, how many of you have encountered the spinning pinwheel of death when you've been trying to connect to the internet? I'd expect more than that. Okay. Then finally, how many of you have your internet service at home through a cable TV company? Okay, and then conversely, how many through your telephone company? Okay, that's kind of what I expected. In California overall, cable is sort of taking over broadband internet access, and I'll get into that a little bit later. So I'm Robert Osborn from the California Public Utilities Commission. I also sit on the, I'm a staff for the California Broadband Council. So in terms of broadband, we think of broadband in terms of availability and adoption, and they're sort of opposite sides of the coin. We estimate that 95% of California households have access to wireline internet access, and that includes DSL, cable, fiber, at speeds of 6 megabits per second down and 1.5 megabits per second up or greater. What that means, though, is that the last 5% of California equates to about 650,000 households, which is roughly slightly larger than the size of Santa Clara County, slightly larger than the size of San Bernardino County. Broadband adoption, which is the flip side of that, is lower. The California Emerging Technology Fund estimates that only 79% of California households subscribe to broadband. So the 21% who don't subscribe equates to roughly the combined households of San Diego County, Orange County, Ventura County, and Solano County combined. It's about 2.5 million households. So how much speed is enough for the average Californian? The answer is it depends. At the CPUC, we use a standard of 6.1.5 or greater to determine what it constitutes served speeds. Anything below that is eligible for a California Advanced Services Fund grant. But closing the digital divide is not easy. So if you look at the unserved map of California, it's akin to looking at polka dots covering the equivalent of area of 75 million football fields. So it's a very complicated problem. Another problem is that very few providers are willing to build in areas where there's no service because there's just no business model. That's why the PUC, the FCC, the USDA all offers broadband subsidies. But we may be viewing these problems through the narrow lens of today's solutions, and the disparity between urban and rural will only get worse because as time goes on, the requirements get stricter, they're more demanding. Reflecting this trend, the FCC last year raised the definition of advanced communication services from 4 megabits per second down, 1 megabit per second up to 25.3. As it turns out, the 25.3 standard is limited mostly to cable TV companies. So that's why a lot of you raised your hands, say you have your broadband through cable TV. As you get faster, pretty much cable TV is the only game in town for a lot of people. We look at the statistics in the urban areas, households with 25.3, 97% have 25.3 through their cable TV provider, or can get it, I should say. In rural areas, it's just slightly more than a third. If you look at the people who can get 25.3 through the telephone company, roughly a quarter in urban areas, and in rural areas, roughly 5%. On top of that, we look at telephone and cable TV company competition. So if you have a choice in the matter, looking at the 25.3 standard, in urban areas, only 25% of households, so only about a quarter of households in urban areas have 25.3 available at both their cable TV provider and the telephone provider. In rural areas, it's down to 3%. So is this a problem? I asked that. What can we do and what should we do about it? These are all part of a fierce debate that's going on in the state capitol this very moment. And at the national level, the debate continues over whether internet services should be considered an essential utility like power and water. What we do know is that California students now take their standardized tests on connected computers. So from that perspective, yes, internet connectivity is critical. Libraries are the economic first responders for Californians. Most jobs involve some form of internet-connected online activity. And state, county, and city governments all require, in some cases, you to have internet connectivity in order to get services. Healthcare delivery and record keeping is now done online. So today we're going to hear from some of the state's broadband leaders and what they're doing to connect unserved Californians. First, we'll hear from Sunne McPeak, CEO of the California Emerging Technology Fund and former secretary of the Business, Transportation, and Housing Agency under the Schwarzenegger administration. Sunne, in my view, is the heart and soul of state broadband policy, initiating and negotiating legislation on behalf of the California Advanced Services Fund, and also doing amazing work at the California Emerging Technology Fund with nonprofit organizations. She currently sits on the Broadband Council and along with 8 other members on the council, and her influence is known both in the state and federal capitals, or the nation's capital. So, Sunne.
Thank you. Can we sit here, Rob, or are we supposed to stand?
Either one.
Either one. Well, I just want to say hi to those of you that I couldn't see behind the podium, and now I'm standing. So, okay, I actually would prefer to sit because I think that would be a more appropriate for our conversation. First of all, thank you for that lovely, lovely introduction, and most importantly, what Rob just told you is a compelling case for continuing to work on closing the digital divide. I'm going to share with you the hope. Actually, we've come a long ways in California, and it's really because of the public demanding it and leaders responding. So I think it's just marvelous to be here with folks that I got to serve with, Ann Barsati at BTNH. Assemblymember Garcia has an extraordinary staff here. He can introduce them, but Suzanne and Tony. So I just want to say we got to this point with as much progress as we've made because there was a moment in time in which the governor and the legislature joined forces and said this was important, that we actually go tackle this idea of getting technology into all corners of California and getting all households online. And in 2006 and 7, Governor Schwarzenegger's administration with the legislature, so it was bipartisan, Republican, Democrat, formed a task force. You're going to hear from Anne Neville, who actually staffed that task force. We just sort of continue to recycle ourselves, by the way. And you were really kind, Rob, to talk about the California Emerging Technology Fund is playing a pivotal role. But this organization that I was recruited to work for came out of the California Public Utilities Commission actually negotiating in mergers of 2005 a public benefit. AT&T and Verizon, who were buying, well actually SBC was buying AT&T and Verizon was buying MCI, they agreed to put $60 million into a nonprofit with the mission to close the digital divide. So really, we've just been doing our job. What was really very, I think, powerful is we set goals. California is the largest state and the most complicated that you can imagine to try to tackle these issues. We have the most difficult terrain to actually build in, with more geographic diversity than any other state. And we have more people who were offline when we began. There were 13 million people living in California in 2008 that were not online. Were those residents a state to themselves, they would have been the 5th largest state, larger than the state of Illinois. So we had a huge challenge, and we said we'll get this broadband technology or high-speed internet access to 98% of all households, and to 80% of the households will get them online. And that was a pretty high lift, because we had at that time only 33% of all low-income households online, and only 34% of Latino families, and only 36% of people with disabilities. So those 3 significant demographic groups had about 1/3 of their population online, 2/3 offline, and that's who we continue to focus on to bring the most disadvantaged into the digital age. The history that then followed, because we had the legislature and an administration aligned, is a broadband council got actually written into statute. A fund called the California Advanced Services Fund that we all contribute to a little bit on our telephone bills. We used to be contributing a whole lot more. We contribute a lot less than was the subsidy for telephone, but a little bit of money for broadband. That has made a huge difference in assisting on deployment, and also getting public housing online. We now have come to a point in a very important public policy point, which is, are we going to continue to make progress? You will hear from the California Telehealth Network, excuse me, Eric. I'm your biggest investor, so I should remember CTN.
Yeah, that's all right.
About the opportunity and the potential, but if we don't continue to push forward, we won't have the best medical care into all corners of California. And so I just want to, in closing, acknowledge we've had legislative leaders, Senator Alex Padilla before, who's now our Secretary of State, Steve Bradford, who was in the Assembly, Assembly Member Eduardo Garcia, who's now stepped up to be as chair of our Jobs, Economic Development, and Economy Committee, also a real big voice in closing the digital divide. What I want to ask of all of you is, don't let any of us off the hook. Whenever you see a legislator, whenever you see a member of the administration, you ask them, what are you going to do to finish this job? Because in this digital world, those who are not online are being left behind at an accelerating pace, and in fact, really being disadvantaged from or disenfranchised from the democracy itself, because so many government services, so much information is available only online. So this is a 21st century civil right, and borrowing from that old tenet, I say, access delayed is access denied. Let's get on with it and get the digital divide closed once and for all in our Golden State.
Thank you, Sunne. Next, we're going to hear from Anne Neville, who's the director of the California Research Bureau, where she and her team are developing nonpartisan research for the governor, the legislature, and constitutional officers. As part of the California State Library's leadership team, she also works to connect libraries to broadband and expand use of open data. Previously, she directed the State Broadband Initiative at the National Telecommunications and Information Administration, which is under the Department of Commerce. And she was responsible for both the National Broadband Map and grants to all 50 states to support the emerging digital economy.
Thanks, Rob. So I'd like to just touch on 3 pieces that I think really underscore how complex this issue is. We tend to still think of it in a binary, do you have broadband or do you not? When in fact, in California, we stopped doing that in 2008 and we started talking about speeds. So if we think about 6 down, 1.5 up, or 25 down and 3 up, and we ask ourselves, is that enough? As Rob said, the question is really, well, who are you? If you're an individual and it's just you, and you occasionally are using email and occasionally watching videos, might be just fine. If you're living next door and you're a couple that's cut the cord and you're now getting all of your educational and entertainment and sports that you used to get from cable from your through your broadband connection, and you are trying to understand how you use energy, and so you've got smart devices in your house, and you communicate with your family in different places through Skype, you're going to need a lot more. If you're a family living next door and you've got 2 kids in school and you are streaming music while you're cooking dinner, and you've got kids doing homework, and you've got someone else watching a video, and you've got smart devices, and you've got a remote, you've got a new smart alarm bell system so you can see who's at your door no matter where you are, all of those things require different amounts of bandwidth. And so then you go further into the community, and next door to all of those people, you've got, for example, institutions, small businesses. You've got your local library. Local libraries are, for some people, the only place they're going to get broadband access. They're going to access their email. They're going to learn how to write a resume. For other people, they're coming in and it's a supplement. They're going to the makerspace. They're kids after school who are going to work on their projects together. They're using the Wi-Fi in the library. That's why they're at the library and sometimes not at the local McDonald's, which is the other place that has free Wi-Fi. And so you have these very different needs depending on the organization. And I think, when we look at public policy around this, we don't think about our infrastructure needs and build to the very least of our needs. What we do is we build to at least the many, and perhaps sometimes the most of our needs, depending on what's there. So I think just this question of what is broadband is something that's important to consider. The next point is thinking about this idea of mobile versus fixed, right? I mean, you're using a 4G connection, many of you, through your phones. Is that your only connection? There's an increasing number of Americans for whom that is their only connection. For some people, that is a choice. But for a lot of people, it's not. It may be that they don't have the credit to be able to get a home internet connection. It may be because paying month to month is easier, because typically the cost per megabit when you're paying through your cell phone, when you're looking at that as your only access point, is going to be more than a home internet connection. You're also going to have data caps that are lower. Now, if you're not using a lot of bandwidth, that might be just fine. If you're talking about using a phone, or you're talking about using a wireless access device, and that's what you've got for your house, for your family, it may not be enough. And so, those are really important questions to consider. We are so far past the binary, but too often when we say, is it mobile, is it fixed, is it is it broadband or is it not? But it depends on who the community, who the people are who are using it. And the third point I just want to raise is that, I think you mentioned it is, it's availability and it's adoption. It's also about skills. The digital skills gap is here and it is growing. It has always been a challenge. It's always been, it's interwoven into this question of adoption. But these 3 things, access, adoption, and skills, they're inextricably bound together. We don't have people using broadband in the way that it can be used if they don't have the skills to use it. We don't have people seeing that it might be worthwhile to pay for it if people don't have the skills to take advantage of it. And so when we look at public policy, a number of people are from local government, a number of people are from state government. When we look at local and state policies across the country, the thing we see is that a policy that does not include all three of these facets of access, adoption, and skills is not going to be able to serve as many constituents as it could. And so I would just urge, in thinking about policy at a local level or at the state level, to think about all three facets of this, because if you just focus on one, then we miss a huge opportunity, because all three of these make up the whole pie. Thank you.
Thank you, and that is an excellent point about digital skills. And obviously you have that perspective looking at all 50 states from when you were at the NTIA, and I really am remiss for forgetting that aspect. Obviously CETF is involved in funding programs that train people on digital technology, and that's absolutely crucial. Next, we're going to hear from Assemblymember Eduardo Garcia. He represents California's 56th Assembly District, which includes cities and unincorporated communities in Riverside County and Imperial County. His hometown is host to the annual Coachella Music Festival. And when I first met Assemblymember Garcia, he talked about the Wi-Fi buses that come to communities in his district and they provide valuable connectivity to underserved and unserved communities. But those buses really are just a temporary fix.
Thank you. It's great to be here, certainly to follow to both of you who just really laid out a good foundation for a discussion as it relates to public policy and really the direction that the state of California needs to go in. I chair the Jobs Committee, the Job Economic Development, and the Economy Committee. I think it's a fundamental core piece of the overall economic vitality of the state of California when we talk about investment in our infrastructure. And many times when we have the conversation about infrastructure, I think for the most part we think about roads, bridges, water, sewer, the things that will help develop and grow a community. And what we need to continue to highlight is the importance of technology and the infrastructure that it's going to require in order for our businesses to grow, and at the same time for a large demographic that happens to be largely in our underserved parts of California that we are dependent on heavily to make sure that that digital divide is closed for the purpose of preparing the next generation of our workforce. And so when it comes to looking at large investments on the part of the state, I bring the lens of making sure that the word equity is involved in every major investment that the state of California is making as it relates to the infrastructure. And so for me, it's extremely important representing a community that is largely rural in its nature, down to the Mexican border, Calexico, down to the eastern parts of the Coachella Valley. And, the introduction highlights that my hometown is Coachella, where the music festival takes place. But what people don't know about the Coachella Valley is that that is the only place in the country that we have the flying doctors come provide healthcare services to. And so that gives you a perspective in terms of the disparities that exist, not only economically, but as it relates to health, as I point that out, but also as you can go down the list and check every other box when it comes to technology. One of the things that we've had to do is get innovative, get creative with how we bring access to our schools and beyond the schools. One of the projects that has received a tremendous amount of attention nationwide is the buses, the school buses that are parked in rural parts of our district that are serving as hotspots. And although it is a great, creative, innovative way of providing service, it is not the end-all solution. In fact, what we need to be looking at is making greater investments in these parts of the state that, again, a large demographic of individuals who we are going to depend on for economic prosperity here in California. And so we are committed in our work as it relates to economic development to making sure that the digital divide discussion is at the center focal point of economic prosperity here in California. And that we also include our disadvantaged, economically, excluded parts of California in the conversation. And I think, putting my hat on as a former mayor, it's about coming up with creative and innovative ways of doing things. I'll give you an example. At the city, we were able to receive a grant to synchronize all of our traffic lights in the city. There's some people that is, why is it taking so long? But a small city was able to receive some money from the air quality district to do so. And so we teamed up with the local provider to put in the infrastructure to make sure that we could actually put broadband in specific areas of our main corridors in the city, taking advantage of the opportunity that presented itself to synchronize traffic lights. And now a good portion of our public spaces throughout the city of Coachella have access to broadband service. And so it's going to require having the local communities engaged, but when we're bringing the discussion back to the state level, I think it's extremely important that every major investment that we make as a state, that we're investing in the economically disadvantaged communities, and in this case we're talking about infrastructure for broadband services. I just wanted to share a little bit about the perspective that we bring to our job as the chairman of the Economic Development Committee, and it's extremely important to the success of California that we are bringing this infrastructure to every corner of the state for our residents and for the future prosperity of California.
Thank you so much. I was unaware of the healthcare divide that exists, and that's a significant issue that actually helps us transition right over to Eric Brown, who is the CEO of the California Telehealth Network. So Eric is involved in connecting all of the rural and underserved health clinics and hospitals throughout California. And also served on the board of the Universal Service Administration Company, which oversees the Lifeline program, High Cost Fund, Rural Health Care, and other programs. So here.
Well, thank you. So following that theme on healthcare and the Assemblyman's district, the California Telehealth Network, which is a statewide consortium of safety net healthcare providers. These are clinics and hospitals located all over the state of California. We've connected over 300 sites over the last 6 years from basically every corner of the state, from the Oregon border down to Calexico. I've actually been to Calexico on more than one occasion. And you will know that one of our main healthcare providers in Imperial County is Clinicus de Salud del Pueblo. Yvonne Bell is the CEO. And I remember when I took this job, Sunne, by the way, and the California Emerging Technology Fund made it possible for us to begin offering broadband services through the FCC, at that time, Rural Healthcare Pilot Program. Now it's the Healthcare Connect Fund, and her organization put up match funding as well as operational funding that helped us staff and provide travel for our folks like me and others to go out and visit these communities, because we learned that in rural, in particular, if you don't go see them, and if they don't ever think you're coming back, they see enough carpetbaggers coming through saying they're going to save the world and everything's going to change, and it never happens. Our organization, we are on the road. If you go visit our office, nobody's ever in it, except staff meeting days perhaps. But anyway, I'll tell you about Calexico. I went down and I visited, and there was, Yvonne was there with her team. She was gracious with her time. She took me to Mecca and Winter Haven and El Centro and Raleigh, and we ended up in Calexico. And I saw this massive clinic right there on the Mexican border. Actually an excellent facility in terms of its quality and its appointments. The issue is, like many of our sites, there were no doctors. There were not enough doctors to address the needs of these patients. And so what we do, just so you understand the relevance of broadband to this discussion, is we pull down federal dollars. We use also state teleconnect fund dollars to reduce the cost of broadband for these rural and safety net clinics and hospitals. At that time, Clinicus had a bill through local providers, and I'm not disparaging anybody, but there were some egregious distance charges and other kinds of charges because they're so far off the beaten path, and there were no other options that the providers were charging what they could, and it made it prohibitive for her to have the quality of circuit, the size and speed in that circuit that she needed in order to do live video consultations over broadband, which is a signature application within telehealth that most of our sites go into. We were able to save her just by applying the federal discounts, over $18,000 a month. There were phone providers still charging minute usage charges for local phone calls. These things still exist today in rural communities. I just want to explain that to folks. And so agencies like ours have to go out and do the site outreach because, quite frankly, these organizations are generally busy just trying to keep up with their patient needs. And so we go out and we educate them on what resources are available to them. We make sure that they can leverage that. We get them connected. And then we work with them to connect them to the specialty care doctors that their patients need to see. This has a huge economic benefit to the local community because without telemedicine, without what we're talking about, generally what happens, and Ron will tell you this, her patients would have to get in the car or they'd be put in a van and they'd be shipped over to San Diego or up to Palm Springs or Riverside County. The procedures that would be performed on those patients, whether it's lab work, medications that might be prescribed, surgeries, some of those things can happen in the local community and those revenues can stay in the local community. But if they're all being shipped out to the big city, there's a huge economic drain on the rural community. I was suggesting to you that in addition to that example, there are urban centers. Martin Luther King Community Hospital in Los Angeles. Many of you may know it used to be called Killer King. Reopened last August. It is a state-of-the-art digital hospital. If you haven't seen it, you should go take a tour. They were our first 1 gig site with CTN connected. It's an urban site example. They have a deficit of over 1,000 physicians for the patient populations that they serve. 1,000, a deficit. Doctors don't want to come to Compton and see those patients. And then, even if they did, by the way, the structure doesn't have enough exam room space to facilitate that. So we were able to bring connectivity to them, importance of broadband. We were then able to help them identify the specialty and hook up with the specialty care resources they needed for endocrinology, infectious disease, behavioral health. Those are the key needs in that community, and those are the shortages in terms of care for those patients. As we move forward, folks, we're going to see a continuing transformation in terms of how healthcare is delivered. And reference some of it. We cannot afford to leave these rural and underserved, and I mean broadband underserved communities behind. You will begin to see it become more common that you will interact with your doctor online for things that are simple transactions or communications that do not require the doctor to lay hands on you. And we always advocate for bedside manner and patient care when it's appropriate, but with more and more people with insurance here in California over the last 2 or 3 years through the Affordable Care Act and Medi-Cal expansion, we've seen a dramatic increase in the demand for specialty care services and therefore a dramatic increase in the use of broadband delivered telehealth and telemedicine services to those communities. That trend will continue, and it will become more important for you to have adequate broadband wherever you are, in your home, through your mobile devices, so that patient monitoring, exchange of patient records, ability to access your physician can be done seamlessly. So So I look forward to making a visit with you sometime and showing you some of these things. So thank you.
Thank you, Eric. And so kind of following along this theme of community anchor institutions, obviously clinics and hospitals are critical community anchor institutions. We are going to hear from Louis Fox, who is CEO of CENIC, which is the California High Performance Research and Education Network Corporation. It's a long title of the company, but they're engaged in connecting all of the K-12 schools, the community colleges, state universities, and also the libraries. So the scope is gigantic. CENIC is working with the state library and has formed an E-rate consortium for libraries throughout the state to leverage economies of scale and boosting broadband speeds and reducing costs. And CENIC is also part of the two largest E-rate consortia in the nation, one for K-12 and one for libraries.
Thank you. I'd like to talk about, briefly, about three things. I want to pick up on the equity conversation, innovation, and a little bit about collaboration. CENIC works with all of education across California, and we are a not-for-profit organization. We have a statewide 100 gigabit per second, multiple 100 gigabit per second backbone that then connects to research universities, Cal State, community colleges. We work with all of the carriers in the state to connect to schools and libraries. Roughly 10,000 institutions are currently on the network. Now what we try to do, and imagine, if you will, the kind of environment that students and faculty have at UC Berkeley or UCLA or Caltech or Stanford or USC. Those students and faculty have an opportunity to have a pre-commercial environment that they're living in. They're living in the future. And out of that environment, in fact, has come many of the companies that we recognize and a good part of the whole new economy. Our goal is to recreate that same environment across the education spectrum. So to make sure that students at community colleges and K-12 have access to that environment. To make sure now that students and those not affiliated with formal education at libraries can have access to that kind of environment. We know that talent and creativity are spread democratically across populations, but access is not. And so we're trying to ensure that we bring as much access to that talent across the state. In order to do that, we've had fabulous partnership with all the people that are sitting on this stage. In the last couple of legislative sessions with the state legislature, who have made an investment in enhancing the connectivity to our community colleges, the last mile connectivity to K-12 schools, and now connecting all of California's libraries. Some of those schools, for instance, are going from partial megabit connections, a partial T1, to gigabit connections. So our goal, to be honest, is to get a gigabit onto every single social institution that we can. Because right now we're connecting our research universities at 100 gigabits per second, and we're starting to look at the coming terabit networks because of the kinds of big data science that goes on. But what happens when we're successful in a community and we're able to get a gigabit into a school, those students who go home and have access at home are going to have one experience when they're doing their homework, or they're just engaging as young people will. And those who go home to no access have another experience. And so in some ways, the more successful we are in some of our social institutions, the more we exacerbate this digital divide, and the more the equity issue raises its head, because we want to make sure that all of our students, all of our children, all of our families in California can be as successful as they possibly can be. Which brings me to the theme of collaboration. All of us on this panel appear on lots of panels together, and we do our best to work together. But often often there are policies at the state level and at the federal level that get in the way of our working together because we have different colors of money that we have, and we can't mix them together. And quite honestly, the only way we're going to be successful in those communities in California that don't currently have adequate access to broadband is if all of us can work together, and we can work with the cities, and we can work with our state, and we can work with our federal counterparts, who, by the way, are many. It's not just the FCC and the Universal Services. It's the Department of Agriculture. It's the Department of Energy. All of these different enterprises require broadband. So important for us to be able to work together and to look at public policy that will enable that. Two other just tidbits. We are in the process of connecting the scenic network to the state's network, the California Department of Technology's network, to allow our constituents to have access to the rich resources that the Department of Information Technology at the state provides to all of you. Now our schools and colleges and libraries will have access to those resources. And just today, in fact about an hour ago, we announced that we're connecting the city of Los Angeles as the first of a number of cities in California, where we want to make sure that this rich open data that cities are beginning to provide makes its way to our research universities and to our schools and colleges, for that matter, where people can begin to analyze those rich resources. And furthermore, we want to be able to connect more cities so that they can share their best practices and their applications, and we can have some of the smartest cities in the country and in the world here in California.
Thank you, Liz. That's amazing to hear about the gigabit at each school. That will be amazing. And I guess I should say that will be amazing because it's going to happen, right? That's very good. I'd like to open it up for questions. We just have about 5 minutes left, and we have someone with the microphone, so go ahead.
Yes, I think it's real important to get the broadband out to the rural areas. Not really kids out there need to be properly brought into the 21st century. Has there been any work in collaboration with the service providers, perhaps? Offering them some kind of tax incentives to getting these broadband communication technologies out there?
So maybe there for this?
The answer is yes. So there's at the federal level, they have reformed what used to be called the High Cost Fund into what is now called the Connect America Fund. And the Connect America Fund is designed to provide funding to encourage broadband providers to increase capacity in rural communities. It's particularly focused on rural communities that are unattractive for commercial providers to reach on their own. I think we have 3 providers here in the state of California who have qualified. Those would be Frontier Communications, which recently acquired the Verizon wireline properties. I'm sorry. The second would be AT&T, and I think the third is Consolidated, if I'm not mistaken. And the collective amount of money that these 3 companies have, and you can find this online, is about, I think it's about $500 million, if that's correct.
It's $590 million over 6 years.
All right, it's got $600 million, I thought. And so I will tell you that organizations like mine and Sunne and others are very aware of who has received these funds, and from the healthcare perspective, we are having direct discussions with each of those 3 providers to say, okay, you got this money. We need to make sure that we utilize it to serve communities that are unserved or underserved from a broadband perspective. Obviously, my interest is in the healthcare anchor institutions. But how do we do this? I need you to understand that we try to do this in a fashion that if broadband is coming to a community that doesn't have it, we want it to come so that everybody in the community has access to it. I'm not just interested in serving the hospital or the clinic and everybody else doesn't have it. So long-winded answer to your question is yes, there are incentives And that's essentially what we were working on for the California Bank Services Fund bill that the Assembly member and others have been assisting us with.
I'd like to add that with the California legislature's help, we're in the process of investing about $76 million into last mile connections for schools that don't have robust connectivity. And this has allowed carriers, this is one-time money, so it's allowed carriers to do special construction to those schools in return for low recurring costs, which are also subsidized by federal E-rate and by the California Teleconnect Fund. So once that construction is done, that school has very robust connectivity. The trick in this is how do we leverage that then with all of you in your cities and working with Eric and Sunne to make sure that that kind of connectivity finds its way into the broader community, not just the school that's covered by Prop 98 dollars.
I've got a quick question for you. Since you're trying to reach people that don't have a broadband connection, how do you market to those people to make them aware that this opportunity exists?
So that's a really good question, and we often joke among ourselves that some of the companies who are offering an affordable offer do it only online, which doesn't have people who aren't online. They don't even have a telephone. The companies sometimes haven't even had a telephone number. It is why we have spent a lot of time working with Anne Neville when she was with the Department of Commerce and NTIA. And as she said, you have to have not only the infrastructure, but also a focus on adoption. And then the digital literacy, it takes a really intense effort with a trusted messenger, a community-based organization, a school, a library, to reach out in language and in culture to those who are not online, explain the value proposition, and also lay out their choices as consumers and help them get to the company they choose. That investment, by the way, we know can be less than, and still get people online, less than what the companies are these days advertising to steal customers from each other. So it would cost about, and we advocate to the state, about $250 to a Broadway, to a community organization, school, library, to do all the work I just said, including the digital literacy skills and get somebody online. And you can go in any newspaper, and one company is going to pay another company's customer $500 to switch. So we're well within the ballpark of how to make digital access and digital inclusion being something for everybody in California.
We have time for one more question before we need to excuse everybody to the 2 o'clock education sessions. Anybody? Raise your hand high. Really? You guys did an excellent job, obviously, of explaining this. Can we get a big hand for that?
Yeah, I just wanted to thank Chris Cruz at the Department of Technology for sponsoring the event and also for PSB for putting the event on. Thank you. And thank you to the panel.